Hey y'all, and welcome to this week's From the Vault episode from the Magdalen House podcast. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Dallas, Texas, and known affectionately by many as Maggies. Every first and third Wednesday, we bring you a new release, and our From the Vault episodes, we share podcast releases from our 3 different podcast series, Recover Ed, Recovered, Interviews with Alcoholics, and Hope for the Family. Our podcasts aim to connect, inspire, and educate alcoholics, loved ones, and the community to the Magdalen House and the services we offer. We are so glad that you're here. Thanks for listening.
Hello, podcast listeners. My name is Stephanie Crawford, and I am the host of this here podcast, Recover Out Loud. And today on Recover Out Loud, we are recording our series, Recovered, Interviews with Alcoholic Women. And today we have on a special guest, and I know I say that all the time, but she came highly recommended by Chloe. And if you are a regular podcast listener, you should know that Chloe's episodes are amazing. So if she really recommends someone, I'm going to get them on. So her name is Kate, and I just learned that she was at one point Farmer Kate. Maybe I'm wrong. But she's just a delight. We've been talking for almost like a half hour before we even started this. And so I have really big hopes on how this is going to be. So Kate, if you don't mind just introducing yourself, giving us a little bit of background on what your alcoholism looked like and what led you to a place to want to get sober.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me here and for letting me be of service in this way. And shout out to Chloe. I love that girl. So where do we start? I had a few experiences drinking before I went away to college. I grew up, I should say, in a small town in Napa Valley, California, in a wonderful family. 2 rock star parents, a sweet little sister. And we were very, very close. We still are today. But, you know, my life growing up was all about the small town, the community, school, sports, you know, just being a part of what was happening in life at that point. And I was, you know, involved with many things, be it church or school or sports, and kept very, very busy in all of those things. And so there wasn't a lot of room for me to deviate much, nor was there any sort of desire to, you know, get involved with what then I saw as, you know, silly kid shenanigans. You know, my mom kept a very strict house. So there was a proper, you know, code and conduct that we were expected to follow. And like I said, I mean, I just that was what was normal. That's what I experienced, and that's what I knew as being the way that we did things. So when I talk about my drinking or the beginnings of my drinking, I do mention these few times when I deviated in high school. And, you know, truth be told is that when I came into recovery by way of treatment, I didn't totally remember these 2 times. You know, when I thought back about my drinking career initially, I thought about getting going in college and then what my 20s looked like and ultimately what it all came to. But these first few times I now remember, thanks to the help of my cousin and a few friends. And they're important for me to talk about because what I've realized is that I had the allergy from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. You know, our book talks about how our bodies are different than our fellows. And what happened was, you know, as soon as alcohol came into my body, I was seeking what we understand this allergy to be, this phenomenon of craving, and I drank, you know, and pursued that until I was physically incapable of doing that any further. So what it looked like was, you know, one weekend, my senior year of high school, going down to visit my cousin at college and thinking I was there to see the school and meet some of his friends and have a fun weekend away. And as young kids do, we knew that there was a Friday night and a Saturday night. So him and his friends got, enough stores for the weekend, especially bought me a bottle of my own. He told me it was going to, be more than I needed. And if I just wanted to have a little bit, that was okay too. And so they bought me my own little bottle of raspberry Smirnoff vodka. Nice. And I remember taking a sip of it and it tasting like candy. And I was like, this is great. And, at first we all were having fun. Only, about an hour into the night, for him, what he tells me now was for him to find me kind of peeled over in a corner, nearly passed out, and the bottle being empty. And I had no memory of that until like a year ago when my cousin helped me remember. And so, those few times, the other one, we don't need to get into the details around, but it was the same sort of thing. It was like there was alcohol, I took a sip, and I was drinking until I couldn't drink anymore. But my drinking, really set off when I went away to college. And as I mentioned, I grew up in this small town, small community where everyone knows your name. This was my first taste of what I thought was independence, was moving from small town St. Helena to, also small town Vermont, but 3,000 miles away, being on my own. And I arrived on campus just ready to have fun. And pretty much right from the start again, every time that there was a time to have fun, there was alcohol. And every time I took a sip, I was off to the races. And back then in college, I remember always enjoying those fun times. Keeping pace with kids that were older, keeping pace with kids that had, partied in high school, this sort of stuff. And looking back at it, thinking then, I can drink this way because I'm Irish and I'm Polish. So it's, it's in my blood. Or, of course I'm drinking like this because I'm competitive. So I want to be the last person on, the beer pong table or whatever it was. But surely I remember that any time that I drank back then, it was this sense of, relief, of freedom, of euphoria, joy, all of these things. And I remember always feeling prettier, smarter, funnier, whatever it was. And so, even then though, as I understand it now to be the truth, that when I put alcohol into my body, since I'm allergic, I have this phenomenon of craving whereby I have no control over the amount that I take. I could manage it fine. Meaning I knew when we were having fun and I knew when it was time to study and work hard in school. So, fast forwarding through my college career, there were mishaps here and there, but ultimately, I was able to have my fun and work hard in school too. And then I moved home to Napa Valley, ultimately after a year of floating between Vermont and Los Angeles. And I, started working professionally as a farmer and found friends who liked to have fun on the weekends just like I did. And so, now also moving back home, being of drinking age, my home is known for being a famous wine growing region. So
I have a question though. Did your parents drink like you?
No.
Okay, because I was wondering, because you said it's in my blood. So I was like, did you see it or?
Well, and what I meant by that is like, you hear all these stories of like, oh yeah, the Poles love their vodka, or the Irish, they know how to have a good time.
Yeah.
My dad drank more heavily than my mom did. Absolutely. I don't have many memories of my dad's drinking except for the few times that my mom would get upset, but it wasn't anything super out of control from my memory. And my mom is like the most moderate drinker ever. I mean, she has one MGD at 5 o'clock when she watches the evening news, and then she might have another MGD when she's watching Jeopardy. And that's like,
I love that.
That's like her special occasion, So I know, I mean, in my family, there was always nice wine. There was, the adults always had a good time, but in my memory, no one was ever out of control. And so absolutely, when I moved home and was of drinking age, it became more clear in my family that I drank differently than everyone else. But there was no understanding from my perspective of, really just what that meant. And I had no understanding of what it looked like to them. I just knew that I drank because I really liked it. And so as the years went by, through my 20s, living back in Napa Valley, enjoying Napa Valley as a young adult, working hard, but also having a lot of fun, there came times where there were red flags. There were some experiences where, I had some severe consequences because of my drinking. One time notably, which, had a whole pile of legal consequences and landed me in jail, this sort of stuff.
Y'all, I just have to say, and this is a compliment to you too, that you have such like a sweet, kind vibe and like this vibrant smile. If you're anything like me, compliments make you very uncomfortable. But if you don't know her, I just wish that you could see her, because you do not look like you would fit in well with jail.
Well, I will say it was for a night.
Okay.
But thank you for saying all those nice things. But yeah, I mean, there were consequences along the way, right? And what I like to explain, if I'm carrying the message and trying to break down the powerlessness of step one, the consequences were not what made me an alcoholic, right? But I had these experiences that for any other type of drinker, whether they be moderate or a hard drinker even, may have resulted in some, revelation to say, okay, I need to change my behavior. And surely, like the book describes, like I had these firm resolutions that I wouldn't do these things again to endure those sorts of consequences. The one notably that landed me in jail for the night was drinking and driving, and that became more severe. Even though I said I would never drink and drive again, it's the truth that within a few months, once I got a car back, most of the time there was a can of wine in the cup holder. And so as time went on and these experiences piled up, and I knew that I was drinking abnormally, surely different than my family, mostly different than my friends, and I started to experience these consequences, there was this sense of, this looming sort of pressure to try to figure out what was going on, because I didn't know why I kept making the same mistakes over and over again. But what I surely knew was that I always went back to taking a first drink. And, I remember these experiences of like my mom or my dad sitting me down and holding my hand and looking me in the eye and, truly asking me to, change my behavior, to reconsider how I drink and when I drink and what I'm drinking and all of these things, and telling them that I would, only to find myself, a day later, sometimes even that same day, going back into the same habit.
And I'm sure you meant it too whenever you told them that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, my dad sitting next to me on my couch in my apartment holding my hands with tears in his eyes, like, of course I meant that. And then it was like crazy when I would find myself just completely obliterated.
Yeah.
Like, how did I meant that, Yeah. And so what ultimately happened, what led me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, was this experience where I realized, and I didn't have the language for it like I do now, right? But what I realized was that I was doing what I didn't want to do. And the language I have for that today is I realized that I was drinking even when I didn't want to be drinking. And it looked like, me alone in my home with all the blinds closed, all the windows shut, all the doors locked, all the lights off, drinking into oblivion. And again, not knowing why. But for all of these reasons that I thought I drank, there towards the end, like, it's the job. That's why I'm so stressed or upset and frustrated. They're not doing this for me that I want them to do. They're not giving me this opportunity that I think I should have. You know, these sorts of things. Or it's the relationship I'm in. Like, that's why I drink the way that I drink. Or it's me living here. It's me living in this place. Like, I need to move, you know. I need to just completely change everything. And so one by one, I started to change these things that I thought were the reasons why I drank the way that I drank, and kept making the same decision over and over again. I left the job that I had had for close to 6 years, like the same job that when I started it was the dream job. You know, I left it saying that was the problem. I slowly tried to separate myself completely from the relationship that I was in, you know, doing things that, you know, I never would have done, saying things that I never would have said to try to push that person away.
Now, did he drink like you did?
He definitely had fun.
Yeah.
But if he needed to stop, he could.
Yeah.
But why couldn't I stop?
Right.
You know?
I totally relate to that.
And so as these things started changing and I started to say, okay, well, this means a new path. You know, what will this new path be? And I had all of these ideas of what I wanted to go do and where I wanted to go and what would help me ultimately get better. Because by this point in my drinking, you know, I'm in my late 20s and nothing is right. Everything is the problem. It needs to get better. And I thought I had a pathway lined out for that. But ultimately, I found myself in the summer of 2019, you know, without direction because I couldn't manage to stay sober, drinking around the clock, isolating myself from my best friends, my family, just completely holing up alone and barely breathing a sober breath until I finally asked for help. So I hope that was a...
Yeah, no, that was great. So you asked for help and you ended up in treatment.
Right.
Okay. Now, did they teach you anything in treatment as far as like what was wrong with you, or did you learn the big book or anything like that?
So the treatment center that I went to because it was convenient. You know, in our family, we don't have any real alcoholics that, you know, have claimed to be real alcoholics. So I had no understanding of what alcoholism was. I just knew, you know, rehab from like movies or TV or stories or whatever. But it turned out that there was a treatment center in Napa Valley that I was completely unaware of. And so when I asked my dad for help, I guess unbeknownst to me, he and my mom and my sister had already started looking into this particular treatment center. And this treatment center did, you know, claim to have their curriculum out of the big book. So to answer your question is yes, that when I went to this treatment center, they did introduce me to the book. And they did teach us about the bodily allergy that I've talked about. And I'm sure that they explained the part of the mental obsession, which is this other dimension of our powerlessness over alcohol. But I don't have many memories from that time.
Yeah. It's like whenever it clicks, like my sponsor says, like there's a difference between like hearing it and then having it land.
Totally.
Yeah. So were you in Napa Valley when you asked for help?
Yes.
How did you get to Texas?
So the treatment center that I went to made it clear that it would be a good idea to continue with treatment. The program that I enrolled in was a 30-day, you know, inpatient program. And, you know, around probably week 3, they started talking to us about our plans for when we left. And I already knew that, you know, I didn't want to go back to the place I called home. I didn't have a full-time job. I was kind of at this moment in my life where, you know, I didn't know what was going to be next, but I knew that I was feeling better because alcohol had been removed and that I was willing to continue to, you know, work this program or attend meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever that looked like. I was willing to do what the treatment center suggested that I do. And so the folks at this clinic helped me start to look into opportunities, you know. So it was pretty like classic. It was like, okay, are there sober living places where you could go? Are you interested in going to further inpatient? Have you ever heard of an IOP? And I'm like, I don't know what any of these things are, you know. But I told them that my sister lived in Dallas and I missed my sister, and that she had an extra bedroom, and maybe I could go there for a little while to kind of continue to reset.
Is she older sister or younger sister?
She's my younger sister, yes. And so they got on the phone with my family, and my family said, you know, we actually think that would be a really great idea because we hear that there's solid AA in Dallas.
How'd they hear that?
So it turns out that my sister was dating a man who is now her husband, who had experience in AA as the spouse of someone seeking recovery.
Wow.
So he had been married before, and his wife then was seeking recovery for a long time.
Wow.
So he knew about the Magdalen House.
Wow.
He knew about certain home groups in Preston. He knew about the Dallas 24-Hour Club. He knew about the IOP that I ended up going to. And so with his help of learning the resources available here in Dallas, that became the clear path. Was like, okay, I can go live with Meg and I can continue doing this, whatever this is, in Dallas, and then we'll see.
That's awesome. What's the word I'm looking for? But I don't know. What, like, God aligned all that for you, you know?
Totally. I mean, I could not have come up with any of these plans on my own, right? And I think that even today in my recovery, you know, willingness and open-mindedness and humility are fundamentally driving forces in anything that I do. And so luckily back then, I didn't have the language for it back then, but there was something inside of me that was saying, just do what they tell you to do. And like you were alluding to, it's like I was hearing these things. So there must have been some, you know, something that I heard that said, you know, you have this thing called alcoholism. So if you're resonating with that, you should follow this direction. So luckily my sister said yes, that I could come, and I've never left.
That's so cool. And you've made it a home here. So
yes.
How awesome is that? Well, I know you mentioned the amends with your sister, and since we're on the topic of your sister, I figure this is a good segue into it, but you actually did an amends to her twice, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, please?
Well, there's a lot to say about it because it means that maybe I've done 2-step 9s. So do you want me to talk a little bit about, okay.
Yeah.
So, and please, you know, tell me if I'm dragging on or whatever.
No.
Okay, so when I landed in Dallas, I got connected to a home group, and I had sort of done the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, steps 1, 2, 3, steps 1, 2, 3 in inpatient and then again in outpatient. And so when I got connected to a home group, I found a sponsor who was willing to take me through the rest of the work. And I was told from the treatment center to find a woman who has what I want and will walk me through the steps as prescribed in the big book. So when I found this home group, I started looking around the rooms to try to find this woman who had what I wanted and was willing to use the book to show me this path. And so I started working with a wonderful woman who is still one of my friends today. And she did take me through the steps. Not in the same way that I was taken through the steps about a year ago, which was sincerely out of the book. But we used the book to guide, you know, some of our conversations around the steps that we were on between step 4 and step 9. We used the 12 and 12 as well. And so, you know, I thought I had taken an inventory in 3 parts. You know, I thought I had done step 6 and 7. And so I set out to begin my 8 and 9. And my sister was on my resentments list. So that meant that she was going to be on my 8th step list. And that meant that I would be making amends to her.
So your sponsor did do that then?
She did.
Okay. That one sponsee that I was telling you about, her sponsor had her like burn hers. And I was like, no. We don't do that because that's where we get your harms.
Well, that's very funny because mine also had me burn mine.
Really?
But not before I made my 8-step list.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I didn't ask her if that was the case.
So I did have a list to use when I was doing my 8-step. So, and then we burned it later. So unfortunately, I can't look back at that. But my sister was on my amends list. And I was counseled by my sponsor at the time to ask her if she was willing to meet with me because there was something important I needed to talk to her about. And so I remember going over to her home and sitting upstairs in the bedroom, and we sat on the floor and I held her hands and I said, I am very sorry for all of the things that I did when I was drunk. And that wasn't me, that was the drinking. And I want to be a better big sister to you from here moving forward. And I'm willing to make it right however I can. But if you're a recovered woman in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know that was essentially what the book warns us not to do, which is a remorseful mumbling of an apology. Littered with a little bit of the language from the book, meaning like, I'm willing to do what I need to do to make it right. But that's basically the extent of the first amends that I made to my sister. And my sister, from when I showed up to Dallas and until today, just has shown me so much love and so much support in my journey of sobriety. And so that day when we sat down together and I made that first amends, she could not have been more sweet and wonderful and shared that she was just so happy that I was doing better and that all was forgiven. Well, in the same way I made other amends the first time that I worked the steps.
It also sounds like there was kind of some justification in there.
Absolutely.
Like, it wasn't me. It was because I was drinking.
100%.
Yeah.
Because what I realize now looking back is that the first time that I worked the steps, it was all about drinking. Mm-hmm. All of the bad things that I had done were a result of my drinking. Alcohol was the problem. The goal in working the steps the first time, and really for the first almost year and a half of my recovery, the point was to stay sober. So if I need to stay sober, which means I can't drink again, then I'm going to do this stuff that y'all are telling me to do. And knowing that, the real problem was that I was a foolish drunk for a long time. That's what I thought. Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll talk more about my experience with the first 12 steps later on, but specific in amends to my sister is that the second time that I made amends to her, so, now let's suggest about a year had passed and I became, restless, irritable, and discontented even though I was sober. I was very confused. I was scared. I didn't know why I was feeling the way that I was feeling because I thought that if I did this work that I was supposed to be better. And so that led me into working the steps a second time. And I can explain more about that if you want me to. Mm-hmm. But what ended up happening was that when I came around to my 9th step this time in recovery, having worked the steps as prescribed in the book with a sponsor, a recovered woman who guided me through the text and directed me to use the text through each step. So that was how we did it the second time with my current sponsor, a completely new sponsor, completely new experience. So when I came to step 9, again, my sister, even though she was on my resentments list the first time and I had made amends, was on my resentment list again, this time for, some new details of what was the cause of my resentment. And unlike the first time, this time I saw that my mistakes were completely, based in fear, in selfishness, in self-centeredness, in pride. I was dishonest. I was manipulative. I mean, all of these things that I that time saw so clearly.
You didn't see it the first time.
I did not.
Oh, why do you think that is? Did you just do it differently?
I don't know. I don't know why.
Did you write inventory the same way?
We did. I used charts the first time. Mm-hmm. The second time, I made a chart in my own notebook like my sponsor showed me to do, because the book gives us a guide. But that time I saw it very differently. And the reason why I saw it so clearly this time is because my sponsor showed me exactly where in the book it talks about what we're doing. The reason why I saw it differently the second time is because in between the third and the fourth column, my sponsor asked me to pray each and every time to ask God to show me my mistakes, using, the resentment's prayer or the sick man's prayer that our book gives us. But I did that. I got on my knees every single time that I was on my fourth column for each person on my resentments list, or my fears, or my harms done to others, sex conduct. And I prayed and I asked God to show me clearly what were my mistakes.
I love that.
And so this time it was blaring. And so when I went to make amends to my sister for the second time, because, at this point, I wasn't as close with my sister as I thought I would be. We've been living in Dallas either with each other or very near and around each other for a year and a half at this point, and I was still blocked when it came to my sister. I still had, fears galore, and I had pride stuff, and I was very judgmental of my sister. And so it was paramount that I, not only for her, but for everything that was still blocking me, to be rid of that stuff. And so when I came to make amends to her the second time, it looked totally different. And she came over to my house, and I live in a high rise in Uptown, and we sat out on the balcony, and it was sunset. And I held her hand just like the first time, and we both got teary, but I specifically took responsibility for the mistakes that I had made. And I was able to recall in some detail to her 2 specific events that had occurred in our mutual life where I knew I was at fault. And then I also mentioned the manipulation, the dishonesty, the pride and the ego, and these things that I knew had been blocking me when it came to just sincerely loving her for exactly who she was. And I told her that with these mistakes that I had made and with these attitudes that I had had towards her, that I was willing to make it right, to not do those things, and to make it right however I could to her. And she was very tearful this time because I recalled those specific events that brought us both pain. The events that in the past I had blamed her for, but really were of my making. And she was overwhelmed. She told me, I can't believe you remember that, and that you're talking about it like this. And so as we're sitting there and I'm using language, guided by the book, but language that was truly from my heart, and taking full responsibility in this completely new way from the first time, we're sitting there and we're holding hands, and all of a sudden we see over downtown Dallas these clouds coming across the sky. And what was a sunset started to become a dark, ominous sort of, storm that started to move across the eastern sky of Dallas. And we're sort of looking at it from the corner of our eyes as we're just pouring love into each other. And all of a sudden, it starts to pour, just completely pour. The wind picks up. It was like we're standing on a balcony 10 floors up, holding hands, going, what is going on? And she's like, I'm scared. I'm like, I'm not. It's okay. So we stood there, and this storm whipped through, and we stood out on the balcony and endured the storm together. And then the sun started to peek back out, and she was still holding my hand, and she looks over at me and she says, hey, that was the cleanse we needed.
I was going to say, what a beautiful symbolism.
She was like, this is the cleanse we've been waiting for.
Are you or someone you know struggling with the inability to stop drinking? At the Magdalen House, we believe that alcoholic women deserve a place to recover with dignity.
In our 2-week residential program, clients will be introduced to what alcoholism is and what alcoholism isn't, as well as be presented with a solution, all in a loving and supportive environment. All of our programs are at absolutely no cost, and because we accept no government money, we can accept women all over the world and stick to our own curriculum. If you want to stop drinking and cannot, call 214-324-9261 for a phone screen. Yeah. So you have a good relationship with her today?
Yes.
Oh, that's lovely.
We are very close.
Do you think she'll listen to this?
Probably. You know, what's so funny is that she texted me today, and she said, I want to see you. I really miss my sister. And she said, I've had a rough couple of days and I would love to talk to you. And so I dropped what I was doing and I called her, because that's what I do now today. Mm-hmm. You know, I get to show up for the people in my life today. And so I called her and she shared with me some news that she had received recently that was rattling her. And I got to just share with her, you know, how today I might process information. And we had this really special, intimate conversation. And she said, I knew that you would help me get some clarity.
Oh, that makes me want to cry.
Well, and, you know, so it's just like before she would not have called me about that, Stephanie, you know, it would have been something that maybe she talked to my mom about. And maybe somewhere in the family conversation, it would have come up like, oh, Meg's had this thing, but, you know, that, don't worry about it. You know, I wasn't brought in that way, especially towards the end of my drinking, because I was a freaking tornado. Yeah. You know, so I was not to be trusted with, you know, vulnerability or, you know, these sorts of things that were happening in my family's lives, because I just made it about me. Yeah. And I made it more chaotic. Yeah. But like today, as a recovered woman in Alcoholics Anonymous, like, she wants to call me about that stuff.
That's amazing.
And I get to be like a trustworthy big sister.
That's so cool. So the first time you worked the steps, and I do think that this is super important to talk about, just because like my experience in the 12-step rooms is like, thank God, from the beginning of my sobriety this time, I just know big book recovery. But the more that I've sponsored and the more that I've seen, I have seen women who believe that they have worked the steps, but come to a place where they're miserable and they don't know why, and they want to drink, but just, I guess God gives them that like one last thing to like call somebody or whatever. Mm-hmm. And anyways, and so I have an experience with a sponsee that's like almost identical to what you went through. And so I do think it's important to talk about, that way other women don't have this like delusion that like they're working the program, but they're still miserable because maybe they're not actually working the program. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
And like we discussed before we started recording, was, yes, there are a lot of similarities with the first time around for me and with one of your current sponsees with her first time around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you mind talking about like the experience that you had the first time versus the experience you had the second time? I know one of the things that you talked about was the first time it was about drinking, and then the second time. But can you just talk about like, did you have a spiritual awakening the first time?
So I definitely had spiritual experiences.
Okay.
Being that I started to see things from a different perspective. I wouldn't go so far as to say an entirely different angle, because truthfully my selfishness and self-centeredness was never addressed directly, and therefore never, like, you know.
Oh, so it wasn't.
Well,
did you know that your problem was selfishness and self-centeredness?
I didn't.
Yeah.
Is like the short way of saying it, because there's no way that I knew that my problem was selfishness and self-centeredness if I was still being selfish and self-centered, and if I was miserable, even though I thought I had worked the steps.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Because again, I was so sincerely focused on not drinking, and I thought that what all of this did, what these 12 steps did, was just keep me away from that first drink. And that's, I don't have any profound memories of learning the text like I know it today, pointing me to the root of my troubles, which is that selfishness and self-centeredness. I didn't grasp that. The first time that I did inventory, for example, I was given, I was probably sober close to 5 months when I started my 4th step.
Oh, wow. Why so long?
Well, there was the 30 days in treatment, and then there was the move to Dallas to get into the IOP, and then there was a temporary sponsor while I was in the IOP, and then there was eventually finding the lady at the home group.
Okay.
And then her saying, okay, so you've done 1, 2, and 3, so we should be good on that. And then there was like a weird, close to a month-long experience where she was out of town and then I was going out of town. So it was like, let's just start your 4th step on this date, a month or so later. And then we'll aim to do the 5th step about 10 days later. So, there was that time frame that, from my last drink until actually starting my 4th step was about 5 months. Mm-hmm. And the first time that I did my 4th step, it looked like, I was given charts. Sometimes we see these things thrown around. But, I did them column by column, 1 column at a time, did my 4th column. But on the part where it said, column 2, where it says the cause, I had a separate piece of paper for each person on my resentment list, or each fear on my fear list, or each harm done to someone else, sex conduct qualifier. I had a separate piece of paper for my column 2 entry.
That's a big thing right there, because it's supposed to be short.
Right.
Yeah.
And mine was like at least a page.
That's awesome.
And then, columns 3, I also had, longer lists than the sheets provided. And column 4, I wrote out in detail some of what I had done, but I didn't use these profound words like the book does. Dishonest, selfish, self-centered, afraid, all these other things. I narrated it. Mm-hmm. So my 4th step was a mini book with 3 separate inventories, but there was a lot of detail, a lot of information. And my 5th step was 6 hours at my sponsor's house, sharing stories about each qualifier on my resentments, fears, harms done to others, sex conduct list, and, talking about how it affected me.
So not a whole lot of looking at your mistakes.
Right.
Gotcha.
And it was, I cried for like 6 hours, talking about what they did and why it hurt me. But I still was able to gather, by way of other worksheets that my sponsor gave me, some character defects to take into the process of doing step 6 and 7. Again, I had a page in my notebook where I listed all of my character defects. And like I said, I had a worksheet to use to pull some words off of. But it's very different when it's that way. It's like the second time I knew what my character defects were. Fundamentally, I knew that I was a selfish and self-centered person. I knew that I was dishonest. I knew that I was full of fear. It was that short. And then all the things that come with that. I was manipulative, mm-hmm. I was judgmental, all of those sorts of things. But my first step 6 list was a page long of a ton of vocabulary words that I pulled off of a worksheet to say, yeah, I guess I was, timid. I guess I was, manipulative. Sure, I'll say that. I guess I had judgmental tendencies. Okay.
A lot of minimizing.
Minimizing. Not a lot of, again, it was all up in my head. Nothing had really flowed as it did the second time. None of it had flowed any deeper than just being in my brain. Mm-hmm. The second time is when all of this compiled information, all of the reflection on these past experiences, remembering how I felt September 30th of 2019 before I went to treatment, that, the darkness and despair that I found in that bitter morass of self-pity, all of that had still been in my head, but this time it traveled into my heart, and I felt it in a completely different way. But that first time, it was worksheets and stories and detail.
And you did 12 and 12 stuff, right?
We did 12 and 12 stuff. And no knock to the 12 and 12, what I understand the 12 and 12 to be today is a supplemental series of essays that we can, read.
Yeah, it's not where the directions are.
Right. After we understand and have fully read our book, and, again, supplemental. It's not the direction.
Yeah. Kind of sounds like more therapy-ish.
It felt like a therapy sesh.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. I'm more like, I go to therapy. I'm not knocking therapy whatsoever. But when it comes to, spiritual practices and the spiritual toolkit, I like things direct and to the point, where are my mistakes?
Yes.
Pray, ask God to remove it, very just simple stuff. So, yes, it sounds like yours was very thinking more about me when the problem is me.
Right. Well, and, because I will say that I did have a profound experience in doing my 5th step, because I talked about things that I had never talked about before. And I trusted my sponsor so much, and she really helped me open up in a way that, like I said, I just really hadn't done before. But what I realized was really happening was that, there was no God in it. I was exchanging with a beautiful, wonderful, well-intentioned, lovely woman, but I was focused on her helping me.
And not God.
And what I didn't know then that I know now was that, so much of my first year and a half in recovery, and the first time that I worked the steps, in quotes, I was relying on human power to relieve me of this spiritual malady, this restlessness, irritability, discontentedness that popped up all over the place. And, in that first experience of working the steps, when it came to making the amends and then moving into steps 10, 11, and 12, I did not call my sponsor seeking God. I called my sponsor to help me solve a problem that I was having right then and there.
Right.
You know the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in step 11, I was praying. Well, I should say too, in calling my sponsor for my sponsor to help me solve my problem, when she didn't answer the phone, I was a wreck. If I can't get a hold of her, what am I going to do?
I remember one time I had heard something, and it was one of the times before I got sober this time, one of my many attempts, and I heard somebody say, you're going to have to get a relationship with God, because there's going to be a point where your sponsor's not going to answer, nobody's going to you can't get anybody on the phone, and what are you going to do? And I remember being horrified, because I'm like, what do you mean? What am I going to do? It terrified me, Now, of course I still want to talk to my sponsor, because she always has such great insight and can show me where I'm being delusional, and she's very, very good at directing me towards God and everything. But if I can't get a hold of her, I'm not going to die.
Right.
Right.
And I struggled with that in the beginning with my sponsor today, because I think there was still this instinct that okay, if I'm doing a step 10, then I need her engagement, And so at one point, not too long ago, she reminded me that I have a tendency to become obsessive. And I like to have answers when I want to have the answers. And that sometimes I still fall into that, this subconscious need for human aid.
Yeah.
So, but back then it was all human aid, And what really started to rattle me was when I could no longer exchange with the home group that I had been exchanging with for a solid year and a half because I got a new job. And so at my home group meeting, I couldn't attend this anymore because of my new job schedule. And so again, like being pulled out of the meetings that I had been going to, left to my own devices, not being recovered, not having had a spiritual awakening, I became this total flustered, kind of nervous wreck. Mm-hmm. Because I failed to mention this before, but like part of my prescription in starting, this path of recovery was like, you need to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and you need to be an active member of a home group. And, the home group that I chose met every single morning at 7:30 a.m. So who was there every single morning at 7:30 a.m. but me, And so when that started to go away, because there was very little reliance on God, even through studying 12 steps the first time, studying as I was guided to study it, I didn't have a relationship mm-hmm. with God. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, I was still living in self-will.
So how's your relationship with God today?
It's so fun.
Yeah? That's amazing.
I mean, it's like what the book says. It's like God is either everything or else he is nothing. So my life today is wonderful. I mean, because I know that there's this power greater than me, that, and I'm not it. And I've come to learn how to rely on that, to stay humble and steady and patient and kind and loving, and however life rolls out is how it will. But I have this new sense of peace and direction because I took the action to get connected to a power greater than me.
Mm-hmm. So when did you notice the change the second time around? Was there a time where you started noticing a difference in your thoughts, actions, and ideas kind of thing?
Yeah, well, exactly, that psychic change. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say the most profound initial change was doing my 5th step the second time. And doing the 4th step, but that was, me doing it alone with asking for God to help me on my 4th column. But it's different when you sit down then to do the 5th step with your sponsor and God, right? Mm-hmm. But it was really when I went to my sponsor's house and we did my 5th step that it was made very clear to me that it's not about the details. I am not here to be a therapist. Mm-hmm. I am here to help you see the patterns of your behavior that I've been blocking you. And so from there, it was just like boom, boom, boom. I didn't hold my 5th step. The first time I had my book and I was reading from it, like I said, and I had made a copy for my sponsor. So she had the same little booklet and I was relying on that to share, what was on all of these lists. And this time my sponsor took my 5th step from me and she was like, all right, let's see. Okay. So tell me about this. And I was like, oh, okay. It's going to go like this.
Yeah.
But I remember it being very clear, these in this 4th column, these are the blaring patterns mm-hmm. of my character defects that are blocking me.
Yeah.
And then from there, the momentum just built in how this thing started to take effect. Mm-hmm. Really in living in 10, 11, and 12 and having a practice in step 11, having a commitment to do 10 steps, and then absolutely in carrying the message in my 12th step and working with other women, this is where that complete psychic change has taken place.
That's awesome. You sound like you're a big fan of the book.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part in the book?
Well, so that's... Okay, I'm a huge fangirl of this podcast, so I always hear you ask somebody, what's your favorite part of the book? And then everyone's like, well, how are you supposed to pick a favorite part? And I feel the same way. But always I'm led back to page 100, which is in the chapter Working with Others.
Will you read it?
Yeah. So this whole paragraph, both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were far better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances.
Such an amazing promise, isn't it?
Yeah.
And have you found that to be true?
So true.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. There's nothing about, I mean, it still baffles me that I live in Dallas, Texas, and that I'm not like working in California as a, on a farm all day, every day.
And you have a boyfriend.
I do have a wonderful, the sweetest angel boyfriend.
How long have you guys been together?
A little over a year.
Aww.
And he is such a blessing in my life. He's in recovery too, which
is
is really fun.
Did you know that whenever you guys got together?
It was revealed very quickly.
Okay, but you guys didn't like meet.
It was not a meet cute in AA, no.
Oh, how cool though, right?
We matched up on Bumble, and that was a wild experience too, because I had put mine to bed for a long time. I was told don't date in your first year, so I didn't. But then like a couple of days after my 1 year of
you were on
sobriety,
it, right?
I was on Bumble.
Yeah, of course.
And I had some funny and some weird, some fun experiences, over a few months of having an active account. And then I had decided, the new job, everything else that's going on, I need to focus. It didn't make me feel good. It was fun at first, but it ultimately didn't make me feel good to judge people and pick folks. And
I'm back on dating apps right now, and yeah, it can be a little weird. It didn't bring me joy. Yeah.
It made me feel funny. And so I put it away, and about a month after putting it away, which I thought was like, okay, you just delete it from your phone, I started getting these emails that was like, somebody wants to meet you. And I was like, yeah, whatever. It's just like the algorithm, them trying to like get me
Suck you back in.
But I would pray about it. And back then I had like a little God box, and I would like, write it down and put it in there. Like, okay, I'm not interested, whatever. But it was like several days, almost like a week of these emails that were coming through. And one day when I prayed about it, it just hit differently. And I was like, okay, fine. Like I'll look, like, who is this person, whatever, like, what do they, is this real, or do they just want me to get back on? And so I opened it up, and then he was the first person on my screen. And so we matched up, and his first message was it was a nod to something that I put on my profile. And I had put, answer one of those silly questions like, the world would be so much better with blank. And I put love and tolerance.
And he caught on to it, didn't he?
So he wrote to me and he said, is love and tolerance your code? I was like, what? Cool.
See, I have on mine, God is everything. And I've not met, but like tons of guys who like are like, hey, like, you don't drink, I don't drink either, I'm sober, I'm in recovery, but they don't pick up on the God is everything, which maybe I'm a little, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but I'm like, I can't date you if you're not big buck. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but you get what I'm saying, right?
I totally do.
Yeah. So, well, this has been so fun. Chloe just said wonderful things about you, and you do have such just like an amazing spirit. So I don't know if you've always been this way or if this is just a result of your spiritual awakening, but I don't know, it just gives me the good feels. So Thank you. If you all have loved this as much as I have, please, or you think that there's somebody who could benefit from hearing this, please share this with your friend. Leave us a review on Apple Podcast, rate us on Spotify, and subscribe. Do that too. All of these things help our podcast get out there so we can help more alcoholics and their families. So your review matters. Kate, what would be the one thing that you would want to leave, which I'm sure you know I asked this question, leave our listeners with if they weren't going to hear anything but hear this thing? What would you want to say?
I think the most important thing to know, especially, the hope in being able to have this experience with you today is that we can be helpful to someone else, right? Because that's the whole point of my recovery now today. It's not to be sober. It's to carry this message to the woman who is still suffering, right? And to be helpful and useful. So I would hope that if there is someone who is still struggling, that the thing that they hear is that there is a solution. Because I didn't know that, The summer of 2019, I had no idea. And that darkness, it's exactly the opposite of what you've so lovingly shared, today is like, today I'm very happy, I'm bright. And that's all a result of being connected to a power greater than me that is giving me this direction today. But back then, I was the complete opposite of this,
Wow.
And so I just want women to know, and anyone to know, that loneliness, that despair is not forever, because there is a solution. God does not make too hard of terms for those who honestly seek him. So all it takes is a little bit of willingness to believe that there is something out there that can restore you to sanity. And that ultimately will solve all of your problems today.
Amazing. Well, how beautiful. Thank you again so much. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. It means the world. And I will catch you guys on the next episode. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this From the Vault re-release of the Magdalen House podcast. Tune in every first and third Wednesday for a new release from one of our 3 podcast series. To learn more about the Magdalen House and the services we offer, visit magdalenhouse.org or follow us on your favorite social media channels by searching for the Magdalen House.